First thing I'd like to do is introduce my family to you. Behind me, my beautiful wife Jennifer, who's here today, and my three great kids, Harrison, Charlie, and Grayson, and Mickey Mouse, who you might recognize. That image, a hallmark moment, if you will. Our first trip to Disney as a family, and I think something every adult and child can relate to, is one of those special moments in life. Unfortunately, what you don't see there in that photo is I'm suffering probably one of the worst panic and anxiety attacks that I ever had. Right there in that picture. And I got everybody faked out. I even have Mickey faked out. Everybody faked out but me, unfortunately. Mental illness is invisible and misunderstood, which is a really crappy combination for people like myself. As my story would go, I grew up here in Rhode Island, went to Moses Brown, actually, then on to Ohio State, the Ohio State University, on a tennis scholarship, where I was captain of the tennis team. And when I graduated, one of the winningest players in the history of the school, the only guy in the record book with a losing record, but don't tell anybody that. But then I came back home into my family's business, and by the age of 23, I seemed to have the world at my feet. Unfortunately, I was losing a battle with my mind, was being taken over by terrible thoughts that I was seemingly powerless to fight, and on top of it, who would ever believe it? Well, fortunately for me, I found my way to Butler Hospital, one of the leading psychiatric hospitals that's actually here in Rhode Island, and I was quickly diagnosed with OCD, or Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, and for the last 27 years, I've fought a debilitating illness that's tried to rob me at every step of the way, and affects me every day, even as I'm up here in front of you today. But people ask me all the time, what exactly is OCD? Well, it's characterized by unwanted and unpleasant thoughts that come into your mind that unfortunately create amazing levels of anxiety and panic that it's almost impossible to explain to people. I get asked all the time, Jeff, what's it like? And the best way that I've come up with that I can explain it is, picture, if you will, you're in the airport, say you're in O'Hare, a busy area, and you're with your 3-year-old child, and you turn around for a moment, and then you turn back and there's no child. I think everybody can understand that level of panic and anxiety. Somebody like myself can have that for hours, sometimes days on end, that rocks you at the core. And as if that's not bad enough, it forces you into compulsions to lower that anxiety level. And when I say compulsions, I'm not talking about hand washing and some of these other things that have been popularized in OCD. It's kind of a hot illness on TV right now. For somebody like myself, it comes in the form of mental repetitions and repeats and counting, things that are almost too painful to explain to somebody. But one of the best ways that I found to explain to people is through my own images. Behind me, Howard Hughes. It can happen to anybody. Money can't buy you out of mental illness, no matter how much you got. Howard Hughes was one of the richest guys in the world. And at the end of the day, he probably died because he had OCD like me, because he couldn't get the help that he needed. And in this image right here, in front of his iconic gray spruce plane, you see the symbolism of that stop sign, because Hughes wanted to stop those bad thoughts so badly, but the propeller kept them going. The next image, Half Daddy. OCD, like many mental illnesses, is very devious and a devilish opponent. And what it'll go after is what you value most. For me, my family, my children. Can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen, can you imagine what it's like to feel like you're half there when you're with your children? Very difficult. But again, I'm here today to tell you I'm one of the lucky ones. I got help, and through medication and therapy, I've been able to lead a productive life. And but as my story would go, my caught a break. 17 years ago, I was on the way home from work one day, and I was desperate like so many people that suffer from mental illness, and I was willing to try anything. So I got this crazy idea, and I said, hey, maybe I'll try to paint. You know, I hear that could be good for you, lower your anxiety level. So I picked up some paint supplies, came home, and I think everybody here has probably seen Forrest Gump. Well, Forrest Gump, you know, how he ran, I have become the Forrest Gump of painting, as you might have noticed here. And a bunch of things happened for me. The first was I gained a sense of control that mental illness robs you of. The second thing was I found some peace of mind that I was so desperate for. It also gave me a blank canvas that I could capture my own creativity and vision. I think we all know, whether it's your personal life or your business life, a lot of times you can't control what's going on. But when I painted, I was in control. I was the boss. And I found that invigorating to my soul. And last, and certainly most unexpectedly, almost comically, I was pretty good at it. And over the time, my work found its way into private collections, galleries across the country. And as people, I think, connected with my story, my unconventional, self-taught, whimsical style that was highlighted by faceless characters that people just assumed was the face of mental illness. Little did they know that I couldn't draw a face. But it got to the point where people were paying a lot of money for my work, and I got, to be honest with you, uncomfortable with the business transaction part of it. So I asked my cousin Matthew, who's here today, who had a marketing company at the time, if he would handle the business part of it. Well, Matthew wasn't shy. And 2 months later, we were having a one-man show. I love the sound of that one-man show, like I'm on Broadway or something. And we had a one-man show. Matt comes up to me at the end of the night and says, "Hey, dude, you're not going to believe this." He said, "We sold $15,000 of artwork." And I said, "You got to be kidding me." And he says, "I don't know." He says, "What do you want to do with it?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, "You know, Matt, I paint. It makes me feel good." I said, "Maybe it will help others." That was it. So 2 weeks later, I walked down the hallway of the same hospital that I was a patient at, to a children's psychiatric unit, with a bag of canvases and brushes over my shoulder, across somewhere between Santa Claus and a robber, I'm not sure which. And I walked into a children's unit, and believe me, I didn't have a clue what the heck I was doing. And I got in that unit, and for you, those of you who haven't been there, it's a really sad place, and especially for a guy who had 3 small children. It really touched me. And so I got in there, and we started the class. And first class, ladies and gentlemen, I kid you not, there's a young boy, Jordan, and he's like this over the canvas. And I look over at Matthew, and I said, "Oh my goodness gracious, what have I gotten myself into?" I said, "I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm a nobody. Just a guy who just wanted to help some people. That's it." So what did I do? I did the only thing I was comfortable with. I told them my story and tried to give them some hope and some optimism. And we had some fun doing it. So I go around the class, and I ask the kids, what the name of their painting is, and we're having some fun. And I come around to this young man, Jordan, and I probably took his hand and put some paint on the canvas. And I hear him go like this. I said, "What's the name of that thing?" And he goes, "It's money." And I go, "Did he just say that?" I said, "Jordan, what did you say?" He says, It's money." And I said, "Oh my God." Well, I walked around, and you know the end of the story. Over the next 20 minutes, that young man's head rose. He painted, he smiled. And for all of us that were there that day, it was like an awakening. Even the therapists there couldn't believe what they had seen. So I got to my car that afternoon after class, and I cried like I so often do after these classes. And I cried because I knew I had stumbled on something. I had stumbled on something that was part motivational, part inspirational, part you can do it, all kind of wrapped in this message of hope. So Matthew says to me, "Hey, we got to have a name for this." So I said, "I don't know." I said, "How about Paint for Peace?" That sounds pretty cool. Well, we named it Paint for Peace, and over the last 3 years, we brought that program to thousands of people. And I personally have taught that class in every possible demographics that I could come up with. I'm talking about inner city, boys and girls clubs, advanced Alzheimer's centers, high schools, colleges, corporate boardrooms, anywhere that we could go. And we've seen the power of the art, and I've seen it personally. And I could sit here for the balance of the day and tell you these stories, probably get you to cry a little too, but I know there's other speakers that want to speak today. But I could tell you about the 8-year-old who spends 50 minutes with me and tells me it's the best day of his life. Now, whether it's the best day of his life, ladies and gentlemen, does it matter? He thought it was. And I could tell you about the father. I could tell you about the father who puts his hand on my shoulder like this and hugs it and thanks me. Thanks me not just for the relief that his son got, but for he and his wife. And I could tell you about the 52-year-old woman suffering from depression who was so inspired by what we were doing that she was going back to the University of Rhode Island to get an art degree. And I can tell you about the Disney executive after I spoke at Hallmark who came up to me on the stage after and said, "Jeff, my brother." Well, one in particular I was going to share with you today, which I think is a great example. I wasn't sure whether I would do it or not because sometimes I have a difficult time telling the story. So this was a young lady by the name of Kathy, a teenager, in one of our classes, and I go around after and I hold up every single painting. And they tell me what's on it, or I'll read it. And this day I held up this painting, and I didn't know what was on there, and I read it. And then it stopped me in my tracks. And what she says, "I fight for all types of injustices, not just for those that are mentally ill, but for those that aren't mentally ill." I started crying, and that one really shook me up a little bit. As my story would go, something happened. And if you give me a minute, I'd like to paint for you what happened. Well, there it was. The magical lightning bolt. The one that I've been waiting to get hit by for 27 years. That would rid me of my illness. Well, I think we all know that that's not realistic. But in this particular case, I did get hit by a lightning bolt, and it came in the form of the Discovery Channel. The Discovery Channel had found out about my story and what was happening, and they came to us. They were doing a documentary, and they wanted to feature that story. So my wife Jen and I, we gave them complete access for 3 days in the hope of trying to put a face on mental illness. But it was rewatching it. The second time, the third time, maybe the fourth time, it hit me. Almost like an out-of-body experience, and let me show you what happened. Well, it came in the form of a bullseye. On the outside of the bullseye, I was the CEO of a company, and I thought of pretty good CEOs. There's better than me. Some of them are here today. That bullseye got smaller, marketing-based background, smaller, artist, smaller, mental illness sufferer. And there it was as I watched it, that bullseye. Not despite, but because of my illness. I felt I was uniquely qualified to articulate and communicate a message of hope and acceptance for mental illness. Well, I live it and lived it every day, and I had a feeling for the space. And I knew there was a tremendous opportunity. A tremendous opportunity. Because 1 in 4 people in this country have a diagnosable mental illness. There is not a single person in the audience today that does not have some type of connection to mental illness. I can assure you that. Depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, you name it. I can go on. 2/3 of us will never get the help that we need or we deserve because of stigma. And I thought to myself, how is that possible? How is that possible in the year 2010 at the time? That something could be that prevalent that I considered to be a social injustice. The last one maybe that as a society we hadn't found a way to deal with yet. And I had a problem. I didn't understand why it was you could walk into a Hallmark store and you could buy a card for your dog, but you couldn't buy a card for me. There's something wrong with that. I couldn't understand how it was possible. There was a yellow bracelet, cancer. There was a pink ribbon, cancer had that. AIDS had Project Red. Everybody had something. Everybody but 26% of the population. and the tens of millions of people like themselves, like myself and their families and loved ones, to rally behind. How was it possible in this day and age that was the case? So, we came up with our approach, and we called it Wear, Share, and Experience. And when all three of those things were being done, we'd be one step closer to breaking down stigma. Every time somebody was wearing a product that was inspired by artists in our community, we'd be one step closer. Every time somebody was sharing his or her story in connection to mental illness in a positive and celebratory way, we'd be one step closer. Behind me, an entry that came up on our website just a couple of weeks ago, a young woman suffering from anxiety and disorder who shared this image, fiery flowers, and she told us how she found freedom in painting, and she shared it in the hope that it would inspire others who feel exactly the same way. An experience. Every time somebody was taking one of our classes, one of our workshops, and experiencing expressive arts, and finding peace of mind like me, we'd be one step closer. The image behind, me doing what I enjoy most. This day, in front of 80 middle school children that came down from Boston for a field trip to PeaceLove. And we had some fun and we did expressive arts, but I will guarantee you that these kids left with a better empathy and understanding of something that affects all of them in some way. My favorite part. 7 years ago, I had painted this image behind me. At the time, it was deeply personal. It stood for peace of mind and love in your heart. And it's my dream that this symbol behind me and on my chest will someday be for mental illness what Live Strong is for cancer. And I'd like to leave you with just one final story, if I can. This young girl, maybe 15, 16, I saw her. She had a blank canvas, and the class was going on, and she didn't know what to paint. Well, I walked around the classroom, like I do to all the kids, and I came back 3 minutes later, and I saw this. And she explained to us that no matter what you have, you can always dream big, because there's always hope. So, I'd just like to say to you, don't be scared. Don't be scared to dream big. Don't be scared to follow your dreams, because each and every one of us can make a difference in the world. Thank you.